Users of Reddit, what is your most creepy glitch in the Matrix story you experienced? Story 1. I remember being pretty young, like 9 or 10, and I was the car park of a pub in England, Southend. I remember seeing someone in their teens in the window of a house looking over the car park. They waved at me, and I felt like I knew them somehow. My parents asked who I was waving at, and I said just some lady in the window over there. Didn't think much of it. Fast forward 10 years. I was at my nan's new house. I remember walking into her room, which I never was allowed to do, going to the window. I then realized I was in the house looking over that same parking lot and remembering that interaction years before. Then a girl around 9 or 10, who was in said car park, waved at me, and I waved back. I felt like I knew her. Story 2. When I was a teenager, my family lived in a big 115-year-old brick house. Plenty of creepy stuff happened, but one night I was heading to bed when the door between the first-floor kitchen and the basement stairs absolutely slammed shut. It had a unique sound that I recognized immediately as the kitchen/basement door. There were no windows open that could have caused a draft. Our dog was asleep on the second floor. I was on the second floor. My parents were both asleep in the third-floor attic, had been converted to a master bedroom. None of us could have shut the door. I was terrified. I worked up the courage to go investigate, carrying my hilariously teeny pocket knife for protection. As I went downstairs, I turned on every light. When I reached the kitchen, the door was wide open. Even more freaked out, I ran back up to bed, leaving the lights on. A minute or two later, I heard a definite okay from downstairs. I laid in bed and was ready to accept my demise. Eventually, I somehow fell asleep, and in the morning I was there first downstairs. I woke up before my parents and dog, and found that the lights were all off and the basement door had been shut again. Story 3. Weird but happy. About 5 years ago, in November, we lost our family dog to cancer. She was the dog my children grew up with, loved by all. At the next Christmas, at the end of the day of gifts, food, and family, as I was picking up, I found a tiny pewter dog figurine sitting on the mantel. I asked everyone who had been at the house that day if they left it. No one had. Okay, weird, but took it as a good omen. When my eldest went back to college at the end of that Christmas break, he asked if he could take the little figurine to remember his dog. Of course, I said yes. A week or two later, picking up around the house, there was the figurine again. I called my son and said, "You forgot the dog figurine." He said, "No, I didn't. It's right in front of me on my desk." I had now found a second figurine. Again, no one claimed any knowledge of it. No idea how. But I still have the two of them tucked away on a shelf to this day. Story 4. About a year ago, me and my cousin visited Los Angeles. We were driving around using Google Maps, and after missing our third or fourth exit, we swear we both heard it sigh loudly before it rerouted us. We freaked out and made sure our driving was on point the rest of the ride. The rest of the trip there, if we missed any of our exits or turns, we always apologized to Google, so hopefully she would know we were just morons and not assholes. Story 5. I used to have a recurring dream as a teenager every night for months. I was sitting at a table on the patio of a restaurant. I was out there alone, waiting for my food. A homeless man comes up to the other side of the patio and asks for change. I'm digging in my wallet for a couple dollars, and then I hear tires screech and look up to see a crash in an intersection near the restaurant. I run out there to see if I can help, and as I run out into the road, I get hit by a car and wake up at the impact. After a while, the dream stopped, and I put it out of my mind. Fast forward to me being 28 and sitting at an on the border, on the patio waiting for my food. A homeless guy comes walking past the restaurant, but doesn't stop and ask for change. It makes me think about that dream though, and I start to feel uneasy. Shortly after, I hear the tires screech, and I see a wreck happen in the intersection near the restaurant. I begin to run out there but stop at the sidewalk and look out towards incoming traffic, and there is an SUV not slowing down. She was on her phone and blew through the intersection completely unaware of what had just happened. Ran out and checked on the people. Everyone was fine. Story 6. This happened around 1991. It's the middle of the night. I'm standing in my sister's living room, and it must be a full moon, because even though it's around 1 a.m. and the lights are off, I can see clearly. There's a mixing bowl with popcorn kernels in the bottom on the floor in front of the TV, and some rental VHS in a pile nearby. I hear a noise and turn around to see my sister's normally very friendly Labrador retriever looking like Cujo. Fangs bared, snarling, hackles raised. Suddenly there's a bright flash of light, and I wake up like I hit the bed from a great height. I think that was a weird dream. Eventually, I fall back to sleep, and in the morning I call my sister, planning to tell her the story, but she preempts me by telling me about the weird thing that happened in the night. They woke up to the sound of the dog snarling at about 1 a.m. Her husband thought there was a prowler in the house, got a gun, and went to find the dog. She was standing in the living room snarling at the middle of the room. He couldn't see anyone, so he flipped on the light. No one was there. The dog instantly stopped snarling and walked to her bed like nothing had happened. He checked the property and went back to bed. We talked a bit, and I found out they watched some rental movies, and, of course, we had popcorn. Why? My sister is a little woo at times, so I decided not to tell her about my night. She lived about 450 miles away, by the way. Story 7. I wouldn't say that this was creepy, but it's definitely one of the most quaintly surreal things I've ever experienced. So back in 2016, I was injured at work, and for about 6 months my life consisted of going to physical therapy and being confined to bed until I could walk again. With that in mind, I had a lot of time to read books. One of the books that I was reading was Ex-Heroes by Peter Clines. Now I don't know about anyone else, but when I read a book I like to cast the characters in my head, coming up with how they look. One of the minor characters in this book was named Ilya, and because I know someone named Ilya, and because the book is set in Los Angeles where I live, the Ilya in the book became the Ilya that I knew in my imagination. But then something strange started to happen. The Ilya in the book made specific references to movies like Aliens, a movie which the Ilya I know is a huge fan of. The Ilya in the book was a big fan of firearms, as the Ilya that I know is. Put into words, these details seem slim, but there was something so strange about the character in this book that I eventually reached out to the Ilya that I knew to ask about it. Turns out that Ilya knows the author, Peter Clines, who had put him in the book. What are the odds that I would choose to buy a random book with a story that takes place essentially on my street in Los Angeles and features someone I know in real life as a minor character? That blew my mind, and it's easily one of the most surreal experiences I've had. Story 8. I've told this story before. 3 years ago, my childhood dog died very suddenly and unexpectedly. She was sick for a few days, but turned it around and got better before dying very quickly and painfully in my dad's arms. I live out of state, so I wasn't able to be there for any of it. It's a 6-hour drive, and I felt very, very guilty about her passing without me there. I had a very deep connection to her, and she had been my best friend for 12 years. I was devastated by her death. I couldn't work or eat or do much of anything. I was constantly bursting into tears. It was just awful. My heart just ached, and I found myself apologizing to her for not being there. I just felt so guilty. One night I had a dream about her. I dreamt I was in this empty space, and Charlie came running up to me, whimpering excitedly. She was licking my face and generally just freaking out, and I was sobbing. I knew she was dead, and I knew she was visiting me in my dream. I was very aware of it all. I kept hugging her and crying and apologizing, and she just kept licking my face and being affectionate. I woke up with tears streaming down my face and sat up in bed. I could still smell her distinctive smell, and on my sleeve I pulled off one of her hairs. She had never been to my apartment, and I hadn't seen her recently. It wasn't a cat hair either, as Charlie was a collie mix, and their fur pattern is very distinctive. It may all be coincidence, but it was so vivid and real. I like to think she was visiting to let me know everything is okay, and to not worry. I haven't had a dream like that since. Story 9. I died. I saw it, I lived it. Either it was another world with a version of me that died I saw, or I'm going crazy, but I died. We had a pep rally in school, and after it was finished we had to go back to class. Well, my friend and I were not into that, so we wanted to across the street to Sonic. Across the school there is not heavy traffic, but if you don't pay attention you could get hit. Well, I remember walking with him, and he dropped something, so I went across the street first. I just saw a red Tahoe heading right for me, and I got hit. I remember everything. I remember gasping for air. I remember waking up and sleeping again. Then nothing. All of a sudden I was back in the stadium again, and the exact same words came out of the principal's mouth. My friend wanted to go get Sonic, but I was freaking out. Was asking him everything. I thought it had to be a dream, so I went with him just to see what would happen. He dropped his stuff again and I waited. To my horror, that same red Tahoe showed up. I told him that I'm going back to school. I ain't dying again. I can still see the other version of me on that street, just messed up. Not even moving. Story 10. One day when I was about 8, I didn't go to school because I was sick. My friend was supposed to bring me homework, etc., but he never came. My granddad came home from work, and he told me that that friend was dead. I was devastated. That night I had a dream. I was with my friend at a playground next to our school, and we were talking. Then he told me that he is safe, and it didn't hurt when that car hit him. The next day my mother wanted to talk to me about that situation, and she asked me if I wanted to know what happened. I told her that I know everything, because my friend told me. She thought that my granddad told me, but he did not. He said that he did not want to tell me without her knowing it. That night I had a dream again, and I was talking to him again. We were playing and having fun, and he told me that he really had to go, and we won't see each other ever again. The next day was his funeral, and I really haven't had a dream about him ever since. Story 11. This summer I bought my girlfriend a last-minute birthday trip to go kayaking around the San Juan Islands off the Washington state coast. After a long drive and ferry trip, we found the tour group of about 20 people, and were then shuffled into a shuttle van for a ride to the beach. Now, my girlfriend has a unique name similar to the name of a famous painter. Let's say it's Rebecca Warhol just for fun. It's not. She's a little ray of sunshine, and started chatting with the middle-aged woman sitting next to her on the shuttle as we waited to leave. The woman noted that she had always loved the name Rebecca, as it was her mother's name. They made pleasant small talk in the van until the tour guide passed around the sign-in sheet for all of us to fill out. That's when things got strange. My girlfriend wrote her full name on the sheet and passed it on to the woman, who immediately shouted, "Oh my God," and started crying. After a few minutes of total confusion, she told us Rebecca Warhol was my mother's full name, and these islands were her favorite place in the world. She passed away this summer from cancer, and we've traveled hundreds of miles to spread her ashes here. We were stunned. I literally picked a random date, time, and tour company, and then we were split into the same group as this woman, and my girlfriend was sitting right next to her on the shuttle. What the hell? She continued by saying, "My daughter told us that Nana Rebecca would be with us on this trip, and I didn't believe it until now. It was the most unbelievable coincidence we had ever experienced, and has totally convinced me that there's more to this world than we think." As my brother later said, the universe winked at us that day. Story 12. I shared this a few years ago when this question was asked last time, and didn't really realize how glitchy in the matrix. It was until people started commenting, haha. In college, I took a hard news/soft news journalism class where one of the assignments was to write an obituary for one of my grandparents. The professor told us to write it on a deceased grandparent, but if all of your grandparents were still alive, we had to choose one. In my case, all of my grandparents were alive. I procrastinated actually doing the assignment until the night before it was due because it seemed like a morbid assignment, especially once all of my grandparents were still alive. Scramming for an easy grandparent to write about, I gave my mom a call and asked her for some basic biographical information about my maternal grandfather. As we were talking about my grandpa's career, my mom couldn't recall the name of one of the companies he worked at. She lectured me about waiting until the last minute to write the assignment because it was late, 10:30 p.m. my grandpa's time. However, she said she would give him a call to see if he was still awake and be able to answer that question once my assignment was due the following morning. When my mom called my grandpa, my grandma answered the phone in a panic. My grandma frantically explained that the paramedics had just arrived and were performing CPR on my grandpa because he had stopped breathing and lost consciousness. My mom was able to stay on the phone with my grandma until they took my grandpa to the hospital, where he was declared dead. In the time my mom and I had been talking on the phone about my grandpa's obituary, he was dying. His death was entirely unexpected at that. Although he was in his 80s, he was the healthiest of my grandparents at the time. We ended up using the obituary I wrote for that writing assignment as his actual obituary. Still freaks me out when I think about the timing. Story 13. That reminds me a bit of this time when I was a kid. I had this little joke novelty thing I'd gotten at a magic shop while on vacation. This was actually so long ago I forget exactly what the thing was supposed to resemble. But it was something you were supposed to open, and it had this plastic thing inside suspended on a rubber band. You were supposed to wind this thing up and close it. You hand it to your victim sucker friend, they open it, which releases tension, allowing the plastic thing to spin around, rattling loudly against the plastic case, and vibrating in their hand, scaring the crap out of them. Anyway, I got all my relatives with this thing, because I was a funny little 10-year-old. My great aunt and uncle were up visiting, and staying at my grandparents' house. I had the thought to try this trick on my great aunt, but something stopped me. It didn't feel right, and I very clearly had the thought, I don't want to give her a heart attack. No idea why. She was a bit older, but so were my grandparents, who I already tricked. Well, very shortly after they returned home, I get news that my great aunt has had a heart attack and passed away. Seemed like a spooky coincidence, so that one's always stuck with me. Story 14. About 2 years ago, I went to collect my husband from the ferry after work. My husband got into the car, and as I was driving very slowly out of the car park, we both noticed two people standing a few meters in front of our car. It looked as though they were strangers, older-looking professionals, both walking to their separate cars in different areas of the car park. The man was reaching into his side bag, and the lady was further ahead than the man, with her head turned to the right. I know the exact positions they were in, because they were completely frozen on the spot. My husband and I sat there watching the frozen strangers, not saying anything to each other, and then all of a sudden it was like someone pressed play, and the two strangers just continued on like nothing had happened. My husband and I promised to each other that we would never forget how weird the experience was. I can't remember exactly how long they stayed frozen like that, but it was long enough to freak us both out. Story 15. 1985, my ex-wife and I were sleeping. There was a small sliver of light coming in through the window from a streetlight, so the room and bed were dimly visible. Our black Pomeranian was at the end of the bed asleep. I dreamt that I woke up, reached down to pet him, and he turned into a glossy black bivalve/oyster thing which opened up to reveal rows of gleaming glass teeth. I woke up to my ex backpedaling up the bed over the pillows towards the wall. I asked, "What's wrong?" She said, "What is that shiny black clam thing with the teeth at the end of the bed? Where's the dog?" We had had the same nightmare at the same time. This still gives me a chill. Story 16. Every night I go to bed about 2 hours before my husband. I always wake up when he comes into the room. One night he was gaming with a friend, and it was hours later I heard him sneak into the room and crawl across the floor, so he could pop up and scare me. I felt the floor kind of shake and felt him bump clumsily against the side of the bed in the dark. I held out my hand and asked him not to scare me. I was already scared enough and begged him to just take my hand and come to bed. I couldn't see anything in the room, but knew he was there and just waited for him to jump up so I could move on and go back to sleep. That's when I heard him talking to his friend in the other room. I was frozen. I know there's sleep paralysis or lucid dreaming or something that explains this, but I would have sworn on my son's life that someone had crawled across the floor and jostled the bed. Eventually I worked out of the fear enough to grab my phone and text my husband to come in and turn on the lights and check under the bed. But holy shit, it boggles me how real it felt. Story 17. A friend and I went to a buddy's house for a birthday party. Stayed up playing Halo 2 and hanging out. We all crashed in the basement. Our friend who came with me and I got up at the same time. Not like one after each other. We both got up at the same time after being asleep for a few hours and rushed to the bathroom. I was more athletic than me, probably still is, and beat me there. I ran upstairs, barely getting my head over the toilet before puking my guts out. I was doing the same thing in the basement. I was wearing a wooden cross my grandmother mailed me from Romania. I'm not religious, but I appreciated the gift as I had never met her at that point. Cross somehow became detached from the cord, fell on the tile, and broke into 2 pieces. So we both call our respective mothers and get picked up. By now it's like 3 to 4 a.m. Felt sick up until we left the house. Once I was in the car and a few blocks away, felt perfectly fine. I reported the same thing to me that day over MSN Messenger. Felt perfectly fine after a few blocks. Got the pictures developed a few weeks later. There's a picture of us on the couch rocking some Halo, and the whole room looks like it's filled with mist. Super spooky. I've been looking for the pic for a long time, and I can't seem to find it anymore, but every few years my sister and I search my mom's photo albums for it. Story 18. 2 things. Each was witnessed by at least one other person, and both were while driving. Once at a stop sign in a neighborhood. All of these little sparkles started swirling around in midair roughly 3 to 4 feet off the ground out of nowhere. The group of them were roughly 2 feet wide by 3 to 4 foot tall. It lasted 3 to 5 seconds, and then they were gone. No one was around, and when I asked my passenger if he saw it too, he breathed a sigh of relief and said yes. We spoke about it a little more, but there is no reasonable explanation. The second happened when myself and 3 friends were driving down an empty country road. Very straight stretch. A man on a bike appeared. Someone said to watch out for him, so not to hit him, and then he disappeared. Our minds were blown, to say the least. Just poof, and he's gone. Story 19. I was driving during a snowstorm when a police car started driving next to me, lights on, no sirens. I looked at the officers, but they didn't look at me. They had a weird look on their face. Something was off. They accelerated just a little to pass me, and then completely disappeared. I drove maybe 15 minutes on the road without seeing them anywhere. They couldn't have gone really far. The road's conditions were terrible. I was creeped out for a long time. Story 20. I once clocked out of work at 6 p.m., like I always did at the time, and began my hour-long train ride home. After I had found a seat, I went to sleep and woke up just before my station. From the station, it is a short bus journey, 10 to 15 minutes, to reach home. During the entire journey, I didn't use my phone, and I don't wear a watch, so I didn't really notice the time anywhere. When I reached home, my family surprised me with, "You're home early, everything all right?" I look at the wall clock, and it is about to be 6 p.m. I was too shocked to understand what happened. Checked other watches, cell phones, etc., and the time is absolutely right. A few days later, the admin emailed us the timesheets for the month, times clocking in and out, and every single days for me was around the same 6 p.m. So it certainly wasn't me having left work earlier. To this date, I haven't figured out how I gained between 60 to 90 minutes that day. Story 21. Broad daylight. Sitting at a stoplight to turn left under a highway bridge. In front of me and to the left is the turnaround lane for traffic coming from the other direction. I hear a police siren coming my way. I see a motorcycle cop with his lights flashing and siren on following a white SUV. The white SUV turns left in the turnaround lane, with the policeman following about 20 feet behind. This is where it gets weird. Both the SUV and motorcycle cop are going roughly 25 miles per hour. As the cop enters the turnaround lane, his siren suddenly shuts completely off the moment he passes behind a small concrete pillar. He never comes out from the other side of the pillar. The SUV just continues on as if nothing happened and heads for a Chicken Express just up the street. I'm sitting there in disbelief, wondering how and why the cop came to a complete stop from going 25 miles per hour, and his siren turned off at the same time, and the pillar would have only barely been able to cover him front to back. When the light turned green, the first went and looked behind the pillar, expecting to see him somehow, but he wasn't there. My motorcycle cop got swallowed before my eyes into another dimension, and I think the white SUV did it somehow. Story 22. Taking the trash out at night, super remote area, so I know for a fact we're the only ones around here, getting close to the road, and I hear very clearly, "Help me," from a female voice. Even knowing there's such a slim chance of there being another living person around, I still feel like I should look around and check it out in case I wasn't just hearing things and someone actually needs help. Take about 2 steps in the direction I thought I heard it, hear a giggle in the same exact voice, turn around and walk promptly back up the driveway because F that. Anyone who actually needed help wouldn't be laughing, I don't think. Story 23. I was working on my motorcycle in a dirt lot where I had crashed it trying to do a sick drift, breaking off the clutch lever and the gear shifter. I had brought a wrench set with me, and I was using one of them to take off a bolt when I put it down on the ground to finish unscrewing the bolt with my hand. 2 minutes later, I went to pick it back up, and it was gone. I ran all around this dirt lot looking for it to no avail. Luckily, I had a spare in the car. Fixed the bike and drove back to my apartment to shower as I was filthy. I walked in my room, and sitting on my desk was the wrench. I was dumbfounded. Story 24. My friend Sarah was in a nightclub, drunk off her face, when she got an overwhelming urge to tell a total stranger that her leg hurts. Edit, it didn't. All a bit strange, she ignores it, but it doesn't stop, so she walks up to this guy and says, "I know this is crazy, but I've got a huge urge to tell you my leg hurts." "I know that's crazy," again. "Sorry," but he bursts into tears. Turns out his dad had just died, and they made a pact before that if there was an afterlife he would get a message to him saying a totally random phrase, so there could be no mistakes, which they decided was "I've hurt my leg." Story 25. I was partying at someone's rooftop Airbnb after the bar, and I had the perfect buzz going on. I met a guy who looked oddly familiar, but I couldn't place him. I introduced myself and told him he looked familiar, and he said he didn't recognize me. He was here on business and lived 5,000 kilometers away. A picture of a small girl and a baby came into my head, almost like a memory. I said, "You have a daughter around 5, right? And a newborn?" And then I blurted out, Well, your grandpa is your newborn reincarnated. He responded with, What? I do have a 5-year-old, and my grandpa just passed away, and we are planning on naming our baby after him. The baby is expected to be born any day now. He was shocked. I was shocked too. Where did that come from? I felt as though I knew his entire life. His relationships with his wife, his parents. How he felt about his job. Things only close family/friends would know. He avoided me after that. I don't blame him. Apparently I have psychic powers when I get the perfect level of messed up. I have yet to experience anything like that again.